Hi everyone, welcome back to the 9th video in this series of understanding EMV. We ended off video 8 discussing EMV parameters, and we stopped on this slide pertaining to pin try limit. Okay, so we will be continuing from this point onwards. Just a point to note, there was an error on my slide, which I have corrected. Maybe said in the case we know pin try limit is being used, the pin is deemed to be blocked when the pin try counter equals 0. So I have updated the notes just for completeness sake, but my video editing skills are rudimentary at best, so I'm not planning to actually redo the video just to accommodate this. Okay. In any case, I think let's pick up from where we left, because there's quite a bit of information you need to get through in this video. Okay. So we were discussing EMV parameters and the fact that they're written to the card and how they are used by the card during a transaction, and we've covered quite a few concepts already. So in this video, we'll start off with the next concept, which is application usage control. Okay, so application usage control, or AUC, is written to the card as tag 9F07. Okay, the purpose of AUC or 9F07 is to declare the transaction rules of the product with regards to geographic use and the types of services that this card or this product allows. We write AUC to the card as a 2-byte hex value. Okay, so 2 bytes means 4 characters. Okay, and this 2-byte hex value is used during the processing restrictions phase of a transaction. As we've mentioned before, don't stress too much about it if you're not too sure what processing restrictions is. We will cover it in a bit more detail later on in one of the future videos when we speak about EMV acquiring and specifically the EMV transaction flow. Okay, so let's go to the next slide where we can have a bit more detail around what is AUC and what sort of usages it allows. Okay, so as we said, it is a 2-byte value. So and we know each byte is made up of 8 bits if you convert from hex to binary. So byte 1, as you can see, byte 1 has 8 bits, 8 to 1, and then byte 2, 8 to 1, right? So and don't worry about the positioning of these bits within the bytes. For now, I think the important takeaway here is just to see what sort of things we can configure, and the basic rule is if we're looking to set up a product, and we want to determine what we want this card to be able to be used for, where we want a particular type of service to be allowed, then we give it a value of 1, and if we don't want it to be allowed, then we give it a value of 0. And once we've applied the 1s and 0s per bit, we then just convert that binary value into hex, remember, and then we write that 2-byte hex value to the card as tag 9F07. So let's see what application usage control actually controls, right? So if you're saying that if we are planning to issue a card to market, do we want the card to be used to draw cash locally, go to an ATM and be able to withdraw cash from domestic ATM, right? So we're looking at where the currency code of the terminal and the card are the same. So if you say yes, then this will be a yes or 1, and if you say no, we don't want to support cash transactions, so let's say it's a corporate card and the card is only meant for the cardholder to be able to entertain clients to lunches and dinners and things like that, then we can prevent the withdrawal of cash or we can indicate that the card doesn't support cash withdrawals and that it can only be used, later on for, make it valid for domestic goods and domestic services only, right? So the type of things we control is, do we allow cash transactions domestically? Do we allow cash transactions to be done internationally? Can we use the card to pay for goods locally? Can we pay for goods internationally? Can we pay for services locally, services internationally? May the card be used at ATMs? Can the card be used at terminals other than ATMs? So typically, a normal POS device. And then we talk of things like a domestic cashback. So do we allow the card to be used in a way you go and make a purchase, and over and above the purchase amount you also tell the cashier, I'm paying for a can of cold drink, but over and above the cold drink I'd like you to also give me, as an example, 100 rands in cash as part of the same transaction. Okay, and so this purchase with cashback, is it allowed domestically and is it allowed internationally? You'll see that the bits 6 to 1 will always set it to zeros. It's reserved for future use. So as we find more going into the future, if you find there are other things that we could allow or not, then the schemes and EMV Code could actually allocate those additional goods or services or transaction types to one of these reserved for future use slots. Okay, as I said, and we look at this in a bit more detail, possibly in the next video when we start speaking about action codes. But the process is very simple. Where we want it supported, we say 1. Where we don't want it supported, we say 0. And then once you've got a 1 0 1 0 0 0 0 1 1 0, etc., and then we take that sequence of binary bit sets, convert it to hex, which should give us a 2-byte hex value, and then we write this to the card as tag 9F07. Okay. Let's go on to the next one, service restriction code. Service restriction code, or SRC, or service code, is personalized on the chip itself as tag 5F30. Okay. Point to note, it is personalized both within the chip, so on the application on the chip, as well as on the mag stripe. Okay. Now, historically, the service restriction code played a very important role in the mag stripe world. It's not so important anymore in the chip world, but it is a standard and it is best practice to ensure that there is alignment between what's on the mag stripe and what's on the chip. Okay, so let's assume that we have a mag stripe card. We've got a card, and on the mag stripe we've got a track to value of 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 0 1 2 3 4 4 5 with a little space, and then we've got that's your expiry date, and then the next 3 characters are your service restriction code on your mag stripe. And then you'll have some discretionary data, and then you'll have your CVV or CVC value and more discretionary data there. Okay, so service restriction code is this 201 on your mag stripe, which means when you are writing tag 5F30 to the application on the chip, you have to make sure that the value you write here is equal to the value that you are writing or containing within your track 2 data on your mag stripe. Okay. So just repeating, so they both must be the same. Okay, as well as there's another tag on the card, tag 557, which is track 2 equivalent data. Which is similar to the mag stripe track 2, except that the calculation for the CVC is different. But when you write tag 557, the service restriction code, this value that you've got in the mag stripe and you've got in tag 5F30 must be the same in tag 57 as well. Okay. Service restriction code is a 3-digit data element where each digit denotes different conditions applicable to the card. For more detail, we'll have a look at the next slide. Just a point to note, and I did allude to this at the start of the conversation, the service restriction code itself is not used during a chip transaction. Okay, remember we said that it was very important, for magstripe transaction processing. It's not so important in the chip world. We don't use it for chip transactions. We find that we can cater for the service restriction code criteria a lot better in different tags or in EMV, like tag AUC, which we've discussed earlier, and tags like the CVM list, which we'll discuss later on. Okay. So let's have a look a bit more in terms of service restriction code in the next slide. Right, so service restriction code is, like I said, it's a 3-digit value. So these are examples in the upper right-hand corner. So let's look at the first one. So you've got 201 or 121 or 206 or 620. So each digit, each character means something. So if you look at 3 digits, here's a breakdown. So your valid values would be 1, 2, 5, 6, and 9. 1 refers to an international card, and this refers to a magstripe card, right? If it starts with a 2, then it's an international card, ICC facilities. So this is a chip card that may be used internationally. It's a 5, it's a magstripe that may only be used domestically. If it starts with a 6, it's a domestic card only, but it's a chip card. Okay, and then 9 is a test card. Okay, online authorization mandatory, so offline transactions are not permitted. Right, this is a special circumstance there. Digit 2, generally 0, 2, or 4. Normal authorization means both offline and online transactions will be permitted. A 2 denotes online authorization mandatory, so no offline transactions are permitted. And 4 is sort of similar to 2, online authorization mandatory, but this refers to an explicit bilateral agreement. So, within a geographical region or zone, there could be specific conditions prevalent that would require the use of this value for digit 2. Digit 3, you have values of 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7, and these mean, so if the last digit is 0, it says that you have to enter PIN, it's mandatory. A value of 1 says it's not mandatory, we could allow other methods of verifying the cardholder. If it's a 2, it says that the card may only be used for goods and services, right? Remember the similarity that we saw on the AUC? Okay, so that's why we say that we don't use it in chip transaction, we use the values in AUC rather. But be that as it may, if it's a 2, it's good and so you may not use it to withdraw cash. If it's a 3, it may only be used at an ATM, and you have to have a PIN. It's mandatory. Okay, if it's a 5, your PIN is mandatory, and at the POS device you can only pay for goods and services, and yes, you may as well, you may draw cash on ATM. Okay. 6 says if the PIN, the terminal supports PIN entry, then PIN is mandatory for a transaction. Okay, and 7 means that if PIN pad is present, then you have to do a PIN, but goods and services only at POS and cash and ATMs are similar to a 5, except that so it's basically it's a combination of this one and this one. Okay. All right. So if we look at the examples we've got, for example, if you see a service restriction code with 201, what does this mean? It means that the card is a 2. So it's a 2. So we know it's a chip card that may be used internationally. The second digit is 0. We're saying normal authorization. So now we know it's a chip card that may be used internationally. And the card permits transactions to be approved both online and offline. And the last digit is 1, which is no restricted normal card limit. So what we know now is that by looking at 3 digits, we know that we've got a chip card that may be used internationally, that may perform online and offline transactions, and PIN is not mandatory, right? So it may be used in transactions where you could have different cardholder verification methods like signature or no CVM, etc. allowed. Okay, and I mean if you apply the same, I mean you're welcome to do the exercise yourself, but if you apply the same logic now to 121, 206, 620, you can see that the configuration of the card does change quite drastically as you change these values. All right, let's move quickly on to the next one. It's something called Application File Locator, AFL, and this is tag 94. The AFL is the equivalent of a treasure map. Okay, and what happens is the card will supply the application file locator to a terminal during the get processing options phase of a transaction. Okay. So do you guys remember, in the previous video, we discussed something called data object lists, DOLs, right? And I think we spoke about three in particular. We spoke about a PDOL, we spoke about a CDOL1 and a CDOL2, right? And we said that what happens is during various phases of the transaction, the card would require certain pieces of information from the terminal in order for it to do its own risk management. Okay, and it would do this in the form of, it would send a DOL or a shopping list to the terminal, and it says, "Hey, Mr. Terminal, this is your queen, the card. I need some information from you. So here's my shopping list. I need you to please fill out the shopping list and send the information back to me in the order that I requested it in." Okay, so that's how the card would get the information in the terminal, right? But we have to understand that the terminal will also need some pieces of information from the card, and the card is aware of this. But we say that the card is queen in the EMV transaction, so the card doesn't have the appetite to be doing menial labor for this terminal. So what the card does is instead it sends a treasure map. It sends an AFL to the terminal and says, "Hey, Mr. Terminal, I know you're going to need this information. And when you do need information, here's the location, X marks the spot. Bring your spade over, have a dig on X marks the spot, and you will uncover the information that you need." Okay, so basically this AFL tells the terminal that in order for you to get information from me, I'm not going to give it to you, but I'll give you the location of where I'm storing this data, and you can make a data request to actually pull this information from me for your purposes. Okay. And when the terminal needs information, now that it has the AFL, it knows the spot, it knows where the treasure is buried, and so what the terminal will do is it will send off multiple read commands, and each read command will pull a different piece of data that was indicated in the AFL. Okay, and so typical examples of what kind of data would be listed in the AFL that the terminal would want, would be things like application primary account number. So the tag 5A we've discussed, this is stored on the card, the pen sequence number or the card sequence number, application expiry date, effective date, and your issue action code, right? So I've got a little comment just saying DOL versus AFL. So basically that's the difference. That's a difference in the way, in the way data is obtained by the terminal and the card from each other. Okay. 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 Sorry, there's a bit more. So things like CVM list, which is stored on the card, track to equivalent data, which we've mentioned, application effective date, issue account code, application issue control. So all of these pieces of information the terminal would require to do its risk management, and when it does need this information, it will send a read command to the card, and it would extract the information that it needs. Okay. Let's move on now to application interchange profile, or AIP, and this is tag 82 when written to the card. Okay, So what the AIP is, it's basically it's a list of things that the card is capable of doing. It's a way of telling the terminal that, hey, look, here are the things that I can do, right? And it relates to the following concepts. Okay. It tells the terminal I as a card am capable of, can I perform offline data authentication? And which types of CAM or card authentication methodology do I support? Do I support SDA? Do I support DDA? Do I support CDA? I as a card, I support the use of terminal risk management within the transaction. As a card, I support cardholder verification, and I support issue authentication. So I'm in a position to be able to run my own validations to ensure that anything I receive back from an issuer, I'm in a position to actually verify that I've actually received it from a genuine issuer. Okay, so the AIP is given to the terminal by the card in response to the get processing options command. Okay, it's a 2-byte element XXYY, which is translated on the next slide. Okay, and just to reiterate, so this is a way of the card telling the terminal, hey, Mr. Terminal, this is what I'm capable of. So think of the AIP as the CV or the resume of the card, like where it lists its skill set and and what its capabilities are. So very similar to the application usage control that we discussed earlier, where we said you'd have all the different items listed, and where the card supports something, you'd indicate it with a 1, where it doesn't, indicate with a 0. And when you've answered all the questions, you then roll up the binary value into, you'd convert it to a hex value, and you'd store that hex value on the card under tag A2. So let's have a look at what kind of things lives on this AIP. So byte 1 bit 8, reserved for future use. So right now we set it to 0. It doesn't have a function currently, but it could be used later on, right? As the EMV standard evolves. Byte bit 7, so SDA supported. So as a, this is the card technical terminal. I support or I don't support SDA. As it stands right now, SDA is no longer used. So generally, you would see cards in today's market having the SDA supported as 0, right? Do I support DDA? Yes, I do. Or no, I don't, depending on how we want to configure the card and what we want the card to do. Does the card support the verification of the cardholder? Does the card support terminal risk management? Each authentication supported? Differentiate between methods external authenticator or second gen AC. Don't worry about this too much. It's not. It's technical piece of information that's not relevant right now. You'll see that the next one refers only to the contact list specification. For the purpose of this training, we're focusing on contact, so for contact, it's reserved for future use. Does the card support CDA, which is the highest level of CAM at this point in time? The next one is reserved for future use, reserved future use. Right. So remember, we roll up all the ones and zeros, all the yes and nos, come to a determination of a 2-byte hex value, and then write that to the card as tag A2. Okay. We're moving on to, so what you notice is as you progress along with EMV parameters, you'll notice that as you progress, the subject matter, it is gradually getting a bit more complex, and that's exactly the case when we move over to the next slide, because we're about to start with cardholder verification method. Okay, so we are going to speak about the CVM list, and this is tag 8E. Okay. Cardholder verification is used to ensure that the cardholder is legitimate and the card is not lost or stolen. Now, historically, back in the magstripe days, you know, as a general rule, what you found was that magstripe based credit cards would have a cardholder verification method of signature, which meant you'd pay for something at the teller. Let's use our example, Bob. Bob goes into a clothing store, he buys a pair of socks. He goes to the cashier. The cashier rings up the pair of socks and says, hey, Mr. Bob, you owe me 50 Rand. Bob whips out his credit card, he swipes it on the POS device, the transaction goes online to the issuer host, returns back with an approval saying, Bob's got sufficient funds available for the purchase. And generally speaking, the cashier bags the goods, they exchange pleasantries, and Bob walks off with his goods, right? So the cashier, well, it's been my experience, very rarely would check to see that the person paying for that transaction using that card is actually authorized to be using the card. On the rare instances where the cashier, the teller, did actually verify that the customer is, remember, at this point in time, the transaction is already done. Okay, Bob's already swiped, the transaction been approved, and the transaction or the cardholder verification would be simply that the cashier would ask Bob to sign the slip, the receipt, and then look at the receipt and look at the back of the card, and the two signatures match. Then we verify that the cardholder is genuine. Obviously, if Bob had stolen the card from someone, it didn't take a lot of work to erase the existing signature on the back of the card and put his own signature in there, which means that it would always be verified. Yeah, it's been my experience that validation very rarely ever happened. Okay, so cardholder verification didn't really happen, especially when you look at the magstripe credit card days. With debit cards, it was a bit better because you had PIN entry. And what's happened is with the advent of EMV or chip cards, we've managed to get a lot more be able to be a lot more thorough in terms of how we verify who the cardholder is. We now shift cardholder verification away from the cashier, and we move it to other entities like the card or like the issuer host. Okay. So this CVM list, okay, is how we specify and prioritize a list of methods that we as the card and the terminal could support to verify that the cardholder is genuine. So a CVM list may contain multiple CVM types for use in different types of transactions, and the length of this data element is variable and may be as long as 252 characters. Okay? And this 252 characters is basically depending on how many types of customer verification the card supports. Okay, so we're going to break this down in the next few slides. So yeah, brace yourself. Okay. Okay. What I've listed here is an actual sample CVM list, but I mean this is a CVM list that's come off an actual card that's out in production. It's fairly, this config is fairly standard. You'll see it in many issuers across the world. Okay. And yes, so remember we said it could be up to 256 characters. This one isn't so long, but I mean, you have to agree, just looking at it, it doesn't look quite frightening, doesn't it? Let's break it down. You'll see that if I take the string and I look at the first 2, 4, 6, 8, right? Can you see this? 2, 4, 6, 8 zeros. So basically 4 bytes. The first 4 bytes is something we refer to as amount X. Right? So bytes 1 to 4 is amount X. And this allows us to specify transaction values where we would want to apply a specific rule, uh, for customer verification to take place, right? If you are not planning to do anything, any transaction value based customer verification, then you would just leave it as all zeros as it is in this case here, right? Uh, you find that the use of amount X and later on amount Y is, it's not used widespread. Generally, most issuers tend to set amount X and amount Y to zero. Okay. Amount X only applies if the transaction is in the currency of the card. So it's only valid for domestic transactions. Right? The next 4 bytes is called amount Y, as I've mentioned, and it's very similar to amount X. It's got the same principle. This is bytes 5 to 8. And like amount X, you can use this to set a transaction value where you'd want some sort of different CVM processing to take place. If you're not planning to set any different CVM restrictions, that's value based, and just leave it all as all zeros, and then your CVMs will apply generically across all transactions regardless of the values. Okay, similar to amount X, only applies if the transaction is in the currency of the card. The next part is quite important. You'll see that I've shaded it in different colors. So I've got 2 bytes in green, 2 bytes in blue, 2 bytes in green, 2 bytes in blue, 2 bytes in green, 2 bytes in blue. Okay, so if you count them, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so I've got 6 2-byte sort of blocks here, right? Each of these 2 bytes, each of these blocks is known as a CVM entry, right? And a CVM, so this is your CVM list, and your CVM list may have multiple entries. In our case, we counted it. We know that there's 6 entries in here. Okay, and the 6 entries are 4201, 4403, 4103, 4203, 1E03, and 1F03. Okay, the order is also important. Okay, because this is your highest priority, second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth priority. So what this means is during a transaction, if the terminal supports all of these entry types, it will try to use 4201 because it's the highest priority on the card. And if the terminal, for whatever reason, doesn't support this particular entry type, then it will cascade down to the next one. Okay, so it is important that when we set up the CVM list on the card, we set it up with the priority correctly indicated, so that the one we prefer to be used first is always the first one in the queue. Okay. In the next slide, we're going to go a bit deeper, and we're going to look at 4201, 4403, etc., and we're going to break down. So what does 4201 mean? What does 4403 mean, etc., etc. Okay, let's get into it. Okay, so there's our sample CVM list. You can see it's once again highlighted just to make it easy to see. Okay, to interpret each entry, we have to do 2 things. Okay. Remember, we said this is a 2-byte value. 42 is byte 1, 01 is byte 2. So the first thing we do is we take byte 1, 42, and we convert it to binary. Okay? And by doing this, we'll determine the CVM code and the CVM type. Okay. Now, in case you did have a bit of a panic, wondering, okay, how do we convert hex to binary? Don't stress. Okay, so I put up a little cheat sheet. This will allow you to do hex to binary conversions very easily. There's lots of hex to binary converters online which you can use, and I think later on in the training course we're even going to have a section that's going to cover a little bit of context to hex and binary and decimal and how to convert between them. Okay, and obviously the uses. Okay. The second thing we do is we take this byte 2 and we use it explicitly to determine the CVM condition. Okay, now I know I'm throwing a lot of terms and words at you. Don't stress. We're going to go through this step by step, right? So let's take the first CVM entry, 4201. Okay, we've got 4201. We said we take byte 1 and we convert it to binary. So byte 1 is 42, right? You agree with me? So 42, let's look here. Here's hex 4, 0, 1, 0, 0. So here we go, 0, 1, 0, 0. We then take 2. It's a hex value. We go to hex 2, 0, 0, 1, 0. So we said we had 0, 1, 0, 0 as which is 4, and then we got 0, 0, 1, 0. 0010, which is 2. Okay, so 42 translates to 01000010. Okay, we don't do anything to byte 2, so the 01 remains as is. Okay, and I've just written it there so we can continue on this example. Okay, so as I explained to you, 4 is equal to 0100, is it there? 2 equals 0010, so and that's how we get the first part of the string. Okay, let's work with 4403. Can you see 4403 is the second highest priority? Okay, I got it as 01000100. Okay. Okay, so 4 is 0100, and 4 is 0100, then we have 0100, Okay. I picked up another typo, so this should actually read 03. So you are seeing a 01 here. That's a mistake on my side. Please ignore. We'll correct it as we progress. But actually, this value should. So the first component is right. 010, 0100. This should be 03. So if we look at the other entries, 4103, 4203, 1E, 03, and 1F03, I've just listed them and I've broken them down. So basically, the logic we used here was we converted 4 and 1 into the binary equivalent, 4 being 0100 and then 1 being 0001, right? Is it there? Okay, and I've done the same for all of them. Okay. Right, so let's keep looking at this. So we've taken the first entry, 4201. Okay, we know it's 01000010, and then the 01 we left it in its current state. Okay, we're not going to worry. So don't stress, because if you think this means nothing or if this is meaningless, you are correct. We have to further break it down now, right? So let's focus on byte 1 only, right? So let's focus on the 42, which is a 01000010 component. Byte 1 is made up of 2 parts, bits 8 to 7, which is a CVM code. So bits 8 to 7 will be the 01. It's a CVM code. And then bits 6 to 1. So bits 6 to 1 will be from the 000010. Okay, that's your CVM type. So you have a CVM code and you have a CVM type. So under the CVM code, you've got one of two options. It can either be 00 or it can be 01. Okay, if it's 00, it says fail cardholder verification if the CVM cannot be used. If it's 01, apply next CVM method. So in our case, we've got 01. So we're saying that this entry says that if the terminal cannot use this CVM method, okay, then don't fail the transaction. Okay, don't fail cardholder verification. Rather, apply the next CVM entry. So if you can't use 4201, then jump over to 4403. Now, had the first 2 digits here, after we converted it from hex to binary being 00, it means that the terminal would have said, uh-oh, I'm stuck here. I have to fail cardholder verification. I cannot use any of the others now, and it will flag on the transaction as cardholder verification failed. Okay. Let's look at byte 621, which is CVM type. Okay, and so here's what they mean. So if you've got a value of 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, it means failed CVM processing. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1. Then use plain text PIN verified offline by ICC. So what this means is you want the customer to enter the PIN in the terminal. The terminal will pass the PIN to the terminal in the clear. It won't encrypt it. And the chip card will then verify that the PIN is correct. Okay. The next one is this, very similar to the previous one, except you see this is plain text and this is enciphered, right? So enciphered means when the cardholder enters the PIN on the terminal is going to encrypt it before passing it to the card. The card will then decrypt it, verify it, and then let the terminal know PIN was okay or it wasn't, right? Whereas the previous example, the terminal would send it through to the card clear, unencrypted, so hence plain text. So let's look at this again now. So we said that byte 1 was 0, 1, 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, right? So let's split it up now. Let's split that. I'm just focusing on byte 1 for now. So we're splitting it up into 0, 1, right? Remember, bits 8 to 7. So bits 8 to 7 is 0, 1, and then the other 6 characters are 0, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0. That means that your CVM code equals to 0, 1. Okay, so CVM code is 0, 1. And what does it say? It says that if the terminal cannot use this CVM method from the card, then don't worry, cascade through to the next one, right? Which will then be 4403. Okay, so that's your first code, right? Okay, what the meaning of that? The CVM type is now 000010. So what does this mean? 000010. Here we go. 000010. Here's the match. So what we're saying is the highest priority CVM entry on this card is enciphered PIN verified online. Okay. So it says online. So enciphered PIN means that the PIN won't be verified by the card. The PIN rather will be enciphered. It'll be encrypted. It'll be stuck into the transaction message, field 52, and it'll be sent online. And some backend issuer host will actually verify it, not the card. Okay. Let's look at the next at another example. So I see I've chosen the last one, which is 1F03. Okay. 1F, if you convert it from hex to binary, you'll get 0001111111. I hope I mentioned too many ones. But let's just break it up. So you've got your CVM code, which is 00, and your CVM type, which is 011111. Okay. Remember, we're ignoring byte 2 for now, so don't worry about the 03 at the end for now. We'll discuss it just now. So we said CVM code is 00. There we go, which is the first one. So what we're saying is, should the terminal be unable to support this CVM type, then the terminal will flag cardholder verification to be unsuccessful. Okay. We then say that the CVM type is 011111, and what does this mean? It means no CVM required. Okay, so CVM is considered to have passed or no. So basically, the card says in certain conditions, and one of those conditions could be that the terminal itself, maybe doesn't have a PIN entry. We see it sometimes at some parking garages, where you can pay for parking, where you can tap your card, but there's actually no PIN pad available. So in that case, the card having this CVM entry 1F03 will allow the card to be used at a device like that. Okay, no CVM required. All right, so let's focus, let's have a look at byte 2, right? So byte 2 refers to CVM conditions. Remember, we don't convert byte 2 into binary, we use it explicitly. And here's a breakdown, because 00 is always, 01 if transaction is unattended cache, etc., etc. The interesting ones are here. 06 if transaction amount is less than amount X. Remember, we spoke about amount X, we said the first 4 bytes. So if you had put a value in here, then you could define a certain condition to say use a certain CVM type if the value of the transaction is less than X, and then you could then have a CVM entry where you could use a different type of CVM type if the amount is more than X, and the same for Y, and you could then create ranges by using X and Y. All right. So let's look at the first example, which is 4201. And we know that we had already figured out that the CVM code said that if this transaction, if the CVM type was not allowed, then or was not supported by the terminal, then you could apply the next CVM that was on the priority list. And we know that the actual CVM type was for the PIN to be encrypted into a PIN block and sent up upstream to an issuer host for an issuer host to decrypt and verify, right? But now let's see what conditions were applied to this. So we said CVM condition is 01. What does this mean? It means if transaction is unattended cache. Okay. Let's look at the next one, which we had used, which is the last one in the list, 1F03, and we know that if the terminal didn't support this, then it would flag this cardholder verification to be unsuccessful, and we know that the type was no CVM required, right? The CVM condition here is 03. Okay, and what is 03? If the terminal supports CVM, right? If the terminal supports CVM, so it's a very generic, excuse me, very generic condition, saying that in the event where we want to use a CVM type of no CVM, as long as the terminal supports this, you can use it, right? But I mean, we could have had a different value had it been, where you can specify certain CVM type. For example, we spoke about if transaction is unattended cache. We're saying, always use online PIN if you were drawing cash from an ATM, right? But you get other more specific ones. So you could use 02, where you're saying, if the transaction type is not cash, it's not manual cash, it's not purchased with cashback, then you can use this, and then you can say use offline PIN, use plain text offline PIN or encrypted offline PIN to verify. We don't need to send the PIN online. The card will verify it as long as the transactions are unattended cache, right? So you can create many permutations and many variations, and you can add many more entries to this list to actually, which will allow you as an issuer or as a business to have very precise and very specific conditions for cardholder verification based on transaction values, based on transaction types, etc. Okay. So we're just going to recap very quickly, because we've spoken quite a bit about CVM list. We said a sample CVM list sort of looks something like this. It's made up of the following parts: first 4 bytes amount X, second 4 bytes in amount Y, and you can use this as a threshold amount referenced by the CVM conditions to use different CVM types. Okay, so it's value-based decisioning, basically. The CVM entries, we said, are these 2 byte values that I've shaded in different colors To make it easier for you to see, the order in which they appear is important. That determines the priority in which the terminal will attempt to use them during a transaction. Each of these CVM entries may be broken up into 3 distinct parts. The first is the CVM code, and this sets a rule around how to proceed if a particular CVM type is not supported by the terminal. The CVM type, which is the actual CVM methods, offline PIN, plain text offline PIN, encrypted offline PIN, encrypted online PIN, signature, biometric, etc., etc., etc. And then your CVM conditions, which tells you, which is your last part, your 01, which tells you apply this CVM type, when certain conditions are prevalent in the transaction, and some of these conditions could actually relate to amount X or amount Y. Okay. This covers CVM list. Yes, it can be slightly confusing, but if you just take your time, break it down into its distinct parts, and then interpret those individual parts, you'll find that it actually makes a lot of sense. It's very, very logical. Okay. Let's move away from cardholder verification now, and let's talk a bit about limits. Okay. And we are going to speak about lower limits and upper limits. But before we speak about limits, I think the one thing I should bring up at this point in time is, please do not confuse the term limits with the term counters. Okay, limits are static and they are personalized on the card to provide thresholds against which certain actions or rules around the action should be performed. Counters are generally dynamically changed, and they count events that are measured against limits to trigger certain rules. And the reason I brought this up, I think I brought it up before, and I brought it up again. Counters and limits are definitely 2 separate entities. They have different functions, but it's commonplace for people in conversations to use them interchangeably, which makes investigations a lot more difficult if you receive a complaint about the limit when actually the issue that the person is referring to is around a counter. Okay, so please make sure that you do separate the term limit from the term counter. So, depending on the scheme and on the specific standards, right, there are several different types of offline limits. Okay, this section focuses specifically on the concepts that will apply to all of the various offline limits. And as part of the discussion around these offline limits, we will show examples of both MasterCard and Visa limits. Okay, I've omitted the other card schemes from this. Okay, so as a general rule, we usually see 2 limit types that work in tandem with one another to mitigate offline fraud as much as possible. Okay, these are your lower limits and your upper limits. Limits usually govern 2 aspects of offline spend of your card. Okay, and it's important to understand the difference here. The first type of limit refers to velocity limits or velocity checking, and what this does is it sets rules around the total number of consecutive offline transactions. So we're saying we are counting the number of transactions, the number of offline transactions, right? The second one is a cumulative amount, and unlike the first one, we'll be counting transactions. Here we are adding up transaction values or transaction amounts. Okay, so let's further break this down, right? So what we actually should be aware of are 4 different limits: a lower velocity limit, and an upper velocity limit, and then a lower cumulative amount limit, and an upper cumulative amount limit. And I mean, most of the offline limits will fall more or less within these definitions, right? Just notes, okay, limits on their own don't determine the transaction behavior. The actual behavior is determined by either the terminal of a card using the rules specified in the issue action codes or the card issue action codes. These rules apply to the transaction state versus the offline limits. And we'll discuss action codes later on in this section. And I mean, just to reiterate, I did mention before when we spoke of application effective date and application expiry date, where we said, these are values that are set up on the card, but on their own, they don't do anything. During a transaction, certain phases of the transaction will actually, look at application effective and expiry dates, and then use them through the action codes to actually determine what we're going to do. So the same applies here. Even though we have a lower limit and upper limit, by setting the limit, it doesn't define the behavior. All we're saying is, when we start doing processing using the action codes will actually will use the breach or non-breach of these lower and upper limits to basically respond with a certain set of actions that we've configured, as the issue of the card. Right. So let's look at it in a bit better detail. Let's look at it in a bit more detail. Okay. So during personalization, we set these limits to restrict the number of consecutive offline transactions, right? So right now we're speaking of the lower consecutive offline limit, which we call LCOL, tag 9F14, and upper consecutive offline limit, which is UCOL, and it's 9F23. Okay, and these are velocity checks, right? We're counting the velocity, we're counting the number of transactions. The lower limit is always set to a value less than an upper limit. Okay, so let's use the following example. Let's assume that we set up our card to have a lower limit of 3 and an upper limit of 5. Okay, a couple of assumptions. Assumption 1, in our transaction now, there is no other condition that's forcing our transaction online, right? So take everything else out of the equation. Let's assume, and it's not realistic, but let's assume for the purpose of this training, that the only thing that's determining whether a transaction goes online or stays offline are these velocity limits. Okay? Assumption 2 is traditional action code processing. Okay, remember we said that the limits on their own don't determine the behavior during a transaction, the action codes do, and we are going to assume that we've got traditional action code processing, and what the traditional action code processing means is that if the transaction count is less than the limit, don't do anything. If the transaction count is between the lower and upper limits, then try to send a transaction online. And if the transaction and the transaction count is above the upper limit, then you have to send it online. It's mandatory. If you can't, you decline it. Okay. So using that basis, let's walk our way through the whole transaction history. So transaction 1, let's assume that the ATC is now up to the review. Right? Remember we spoke of ATC in previous videos, application transaction counter, a rolling count of every single transaction ever performed by the card. Right? And this is never reset, it's never changed. So we know that in this transaction that we're busy doing right now, our first transaction, this is the 32nd transaction that it's ever done in the history of the card. We know that the LCOL we set to 3. We know that the UCOL we had set to 5, right? We're seeing an LOATC. Remember we spoke of this in the last video, last online application transaction counter. So what was a transaction count when the card last went online? So we know it was 31, which was the previous transaction, right? So we've got a counter here, which we've mentioned in the counter section, and the counter is now 1, right? And how we got the 1, we know it was the ATC minus the LOATC gives us a count of 1. Okay. If the counter is the counter less than LCOL? Yes, 1 is less than 3. Is the COTN less than your upper? Yes, 1 is less than 5. Therefore, stay offline. Okay, the action code says to stay offline. Transaction, our next transaction is now transaction 33. Okay, the LCOL we know it's 3, the UCOL we know it's 5. the LOATC is 31, so the last transaction that went online was transaction 31. We now on transaction 33. We know that the previous transaction 32, we know we stayed offline, right? In this case, we're saying, hey, look, COTN, the counter, is it less than the lower limit? Yes, it is. Is it less than the upper limit? Yes, it is. Therefore, as per the action codes that we had set up, don't do anything. You're welcome to stay offline. Okay. Same principle, right? ATC is 34 now, right? So we're in the very next transaction, in transaction 3. We know LCOL is 3, we know UCOL is 5, we know LOATC is still 31 because the previous 2 transactions we stayed offline. So now we've got a counter, offline counter of 3. Is 3 less than the lower limit? No, but it is equal to it. And is a COTN less than 5? Yes, it is. Yeah, as per the action codes, you're welcome to stay offline. Transaction 4, okay, ATC value of 35. We know that the last time the card went online was on transaction 31, okay, but 35 minus 31, now we've got a transaction counter of 4, right? It's been incrementing over the last few transactions. Excuse me. So is COTN less than 3? No. Is it equal to 3? No. Is it greater than 3? Yes. Is it greater than 5? No. So what this means is so what you're saying is, you said that we would prefer for this transaction to go online. But if for some reason the terminal can't connect, so if the terminal is having connectivity issues, or if it's an offline only terminal, right? If that is the case, then don't stress, you can still approve it offline. Okay, so in this case, we're going to say, yep, we couldn't go online, so we approved it offline. Transaction 5, ATC value now 36. We know LCOL is 3, UCOL is 5, LOATC is 31 because we're on the last transaction. We wanted to go online, but we couldn't because there were connectivity issues, so we completed it offline. So let's look at the next one. Is the offline counter, can you see it's greater than 3? We know it's greater than 3 and it's equal to 5, right? So it's equal to 5, but we haven't exceeded the UCOL. So what this means is that once again, action codes say, you really should try to go online. But in our case, the terminal is experiencing issues with connectivity. It can't make an online connection. So we say, you know what, we've exceeded the LCOL, but we're equal to the UCOL. And in this case, we really would like to go online, but because the terminal can't do it for us, no worries, we'll stay offline. Okay. Transaction 6, okay, ATC of 37, LOATC is 31, so 37 minus 31 gives you 6. Now this is different, right? Is 6 greater than 3? Yes, it is. Is 6 greater than 5? Yes, it is. So now your action code says you have to go online, okay? But if you can't go online, sorry, but we are going to have to decline you. We're going to decline this transaction, right? So see the difference. Up until the point where, so we were fine all along, even though we were exceeding the lower limit. So when we were below the lower limit, we could approve offline. We exceeded the lower limit, but didn't exceed the upper limit. So we needed to go online, but because we couldn't, because of circumstances, it's cool. We were still allowed to complete the transaction offline, have an offline approve. But the minute that we've exceeded the upper limit, okay, where we've set up the action codes in a traditional fashion, now we're in a situation where the terminal says, look, I can't make an online connection, my network is down. In this instance, we are going to decline this transaction. let's have a look at transaction 7, right? So remember, transaction 6 was declined offline. Transaction 7 has an HC value of 38, okay? The last time we went online was in transaction 31. Remember, during all these transactions, we couldn't go online. We managed to get approvals up until transaction 5. Transaction 6 was declined because we couldn't go online. We now at the point where 38 minus 31 gives us offline counter value of 7. We're comparing similar to that. We know what the outcome is going to be. We're saying, is 7 greater than 3? Yes, it is. Is 7 greater than 5? Yes, it is. Okay, we have to go online, and if we can't go online, we're going to decline this transaction again. We're in luck. The terminal has managed to make an online connection. Cool. So it goes online. The transaction gets approved, returns back to the terminal. Transaction is completed. And the interesting thing is that you'll see I have here before transaction 8. So we've just completed transaction 7. As part of transaction 7, as part of that online completion, what happens is your COTN, your counter, becomes 0. Okay, and then on your very next transaction, this sequence of events that we've seen there will start from scratch again. Okay, I hope that makes sense. So I'm going to push ahead to the next slide, and where we're going to be talking about we're talking a bit more about velocity limits. So just some notes. We may have mentioned this as part of the discussion during the counters video. So just remember that for some application types, LCOL and UCOL checking will only be done during transactions, not in the card's designated currency. So we'll only do velocity checks for international transactions, basically. Okay. And we did allude to this where we said some limits or some counters. So some limits and some counters are used only for domestic, and some limits and counters are used only for international transactions. So examples of limits similar to LCOL, UCOL. So Visa has these limits which operate in the same principle as the LCOL and UCOL that we've already discussed, except that they have very specific definitions and usages. So they've got something called consecutive transaction counter limit, consecutive transaction counter upper limit. So similar LCOL and UCOL, and then you get consecutive transaction limit only for international transactions, and consecutive transaction limit international currency. Okay. So this is for international countries, and this is for international currencies. Okay. But yeah, the principle, as we discussed with LCOL and UCOL, will apply to these counters. Right? Let's talk a bit now about cumulative amount limits. Remember, we've already spoken about velocity checking. So this is not velocity checking. This is not counting number of transactions. Now we're counting transaction amounts. Okay, so we're talking about LCOTA, which is tag CA, and UCOTA, which is tag CB. Okay. During personalization, we set these limits to restrict the total value of consecutive offline transactions. And so let's do an example similar to the exercise we did with LCOTA and UCOTA. All right. So let's assume we're setting. So we went through an example with LCOL and UCOL. Now for LCOTA and UCOTA, let's follow a similar example or similar process that we used to better explain LCOL and UCOL. So in terms of LCOTA and UCOTA, we're not defining number of transactions, we're defining RAND values. So we've got an LCOTA value of 30 Rand and a UCOTA value of 50 Rand. Okay. Once again, we're making a couple of assumptions. Assumption 1, there are no other factors influencing the decision for a transaction to go online. In this particular scenario, it seems that only LCOTA and UCOTA will force a transaction online. Okay. And assumption 2 is traditional action code processing, similar to the previous discussion. So less than the lower value, stay offline. Between the lower and upper value, try to go online. But if you can't go online, we could still approve it offline. And if you breach the upper limit, then you have to go online or we decline. Okay, let's get straight into it. Transaction 1, okay, has a RAND value of 5. We know that 30 Rand is a lower value, 50 Rand is the upper value, and if you look at our counter, so it was 0, and on this transaction it went up to 5. We're saying 5 is less than 30, 5 is less than 50, so it's less than both LCOTA and UCOTA, so cool, we stay offline. Transaction 2 is 10 Rand. Okay, so if you look at the counter, it's now accumulated. The 5 Rand plus the 10 Rand to get 15 Rand. Is 15 Rand less than 30? Yes, it is. Is 15 Rand less than 50? Yes, it is. You know what? We're happy. We can actually complete this transaction offline. The next transaction, transaction 3, we're spending 15 Rand. So we're going to add the counter value of 15 Rand to the new value of 15 Rand, and we get a value of 30. Is 30 less than 30? No. Is it equal to 30? Yes, it is. Is 30 less than 50? Yes, it is. So we're not stressed. We've not breached either of the either of the two limits. So we're cool. We're happy to stay offline. Transaction 4 is an 8 Rand transaction. Okay. So we've got the previous quota value of 30 Rand plus the 8 gives us 38 Rand. Is 38 Rand, has 38 Rand breached the 30 Rand? Yes, it has. Has it breached the 50 Rand? No, it hasn't. Okay. So what we're saying is we've only breached the lower limit. We haven't breached the upper limit. So we should go online. But hey, guess what? Our terminal is on the fritz again. Can't make an internet connection. It can't connect to a network. So in this case, we say, okay, look, we would have allowed it. We could have went online. But in a sense, you can't. It's cool. Let's approve the transaction offline. Transaction 5 is a 12 Rand transaction. So we take the quota value from the previous transaction that we approved offline. We add the 12 Rand to get 50 Rand. Is the quota counter value? Have we breached lower? Yes, we have. Has it breached the upper? No, we haven't. Okay, so it's breached the lower, but it's equal to the upper. It hasn't breached the upper. So in this case, we really like it to go online. But yet again, our terminal is not able to make an online connection. It can't process an online transaction. So we say, all right, look, it's cool. We wanted you to go online, but since you can't, we're happy for this transaction to actually approve offline. Transaction 6 is a 1 Rand transaction value. Okay, yeah. At today's rate, probably 2 pieces of Chappies bubblegum. Okay. Previous quota value was 50 plus the 1 Rand for this transaction makes it 51. Have we breached the LCOTA value? We have. Have we breached the UCOTA value? We have. Okay. So what this means is that we now need to go online. Okay. The action codes say we have to go online, but if you can't go online, okay, unfortunately we have to decline the transaction. Okay? We cannot approve this because the upper limit has been breached. Okay, so in our case, our terminal can't go online, and we decline the transaction. Okay. The next transaction is for 3. Okay, remember on this decline transaction, we had a quota value of 51. The 51 plus 3, it goes to 54. Is 54 in breach of 30? It is, yes, it is. Is 54 in breaching 50? Yes, it is. Action codes say you've breached the lower value, you've breached the upper value, you have to go online. Okay, and if you can't go online, we're going to decline this transaction. We're lucky the terminal can make a connection. We successfully transmit the message online, and we get a successful online approval. On transaction 7, right? So before transaction 8, so as part of the transaction completion, right? What happens is that counter value is reset to 0. Okay, and then thereafter, from transaction 8 onwards, this whole comparison process will start off again. Okay, so LCOTA and UCOTA checking will only be done during transactions in the card's designated currency. But logically, in order for you to accumulate these transaction values, all of the values have to be in the same currency. Okay. And we've alluded to this in earlier discussions in the counter sections, how how we use certain limits and certain counters for domestic transactions and certain limits and certain counters for international transactions. So examples similar to LCOTA and UCOTA. So your accumulated amount limit would be, Visa has something called cumulative total transaction amount limit, CTTAL, and cumulative total transaction amount upper limit, CTTAUL. Please note the following: that the card limits and the associated counters are just one means of deciding if a transaction should complete offline or go online. There are several other checks on the card and terminal. So during an actual transaction, it's not only LCOTA, UCOTA, LCOL, UCOL will be checking that will determine if a transaction goes online or stays offline or declines. There's a whole lot of other things we check as well. So you could get a situation where neither your LCOL nor your UCOL or your LCOTA or UCOTA is breached, but we could have the transaction being sent online for a reason arising out of a different check during the transaction. Okay. Also, it's very common to see, where we're doing a transaction, we could exceed the velocity check, but not the accumulated amount check, right? So what you got is, in this scenario, is that you've got one set of limits comparison and counters checking, saying, hey man, everything is cool, we haven't breached your LCOTA, the UCOTA, so you can stay offline. But then we're looking at the accumulated RAND value check, and we've breached both the low and upper there. So now what do you do when you've got one check saying complete offline and the other check saying, hey man, you have to go online, right? So in instances like this, we have to always remember the golden rule of EMV, which is the strictest rule applies. All right, so the golden rule of EMV, I mean, this is the premise upon which the whole of EMV runs. It says the strictest rule applies. So if you look at the two scenarios we just spoke about, let's assume that we have not breached any of the velocity checks. So we're good to approve offline, but we have breached the upper limit on the accumulated amount check. The stricter rule here would be the breach, right? Remember, strictest rule applies in EMV. We always look for reason to decline a transaction first, then to send it online, and then as a last result, approve transaction offline. So the strictest rule is decline it. Your next strictest is send it online, and your third strictest is allowed to approve offline. So in this particular scenario that we're speaking about, we have a velocity check, which is third level, which says allowed to approve offline, and then we've got your accumulated amount check, which is second level, which says send it online, but if you can't go online, then decline it. So you will always take the strictest one and apply that. So in this case, we would say, even though we haven't breached the velocity check, we have breached the accumulated transaction amount check, and therefore, because that has a stricter outcome, which is send transaction online, and if you can't make an online connection, decline, that is the rule that we will apply. Okay, that is the golden rule of EMV. Apply the strictest rule that you could possibly apply. Okay, I think where we are right now is where we will break. The third and final part of EMV parameters will be covered in video 10. Okay, so this is the end of video 9. Thank you so much for bearing with me. I know it's been heavy going. Remember, you don't need to memorize or know all this off by heart. I just need you to understand it when we start doing the actual EMV transaction flow. All of these bits and pieces that we're speaking about, you'll find they will click, they will come together, and they will make a lot more sense once we start walking through the actual EMV transaction flow. Thank you for spending the time with me, and I look forward to catching you guys in video 10, where hopefully we will conclude this section on EMV parameters. Thank you. Bye-bye.